Here we go. Thank you. Okay, let's go back to the share. So I want to say welcome to this brand new course. And it feels brand new because, as you both probably know, there have been various changes going on with Before I Go. So this is a new start in a way, and I'm really, really delighted to share it with you. And I want you to feel that this is your space, you know. So we're going to be looking at getting started today, and really that's the really personal piece. You know, what is it that motivates us to look at our own end of life, which is something that's still a bit countercultural, and also to think about why we might want to share this work with other people. So these sessions are really for us to share something together and get to know each other as we make this journey. So I thought we would start today just by introducing ourselves, and then I've got a short meditation to share with you. And I think that's a nice way for us to begin each session. Um, then we're going to begin by looking at taking action. Why make an end of life plan? What happens when we don't have an end of life plan? Procrastination and tending our grief, and talking about death. And then we'll just round up by reflecting on our takeaways for this session and what we want to be held accountable for the week. So if I stop this share, and then we can just introduce ourselves. If I start, you both know that my name's Rachel, and I began this journey a long time ago. And you know, it's funny when you look back on how you start something, and you don't really know why. But when I was 15, I did my work experience in a hospice, and it made a huge impact on me. I was interested in becoming a nurse, which I did pursue, but why I chose the hospice to do my work experience, I'm not sure, but it really made a big impact on me. And I met a number of women who inspired me a lot. One woman, well, the first woman I met was very, very close to death. And the nurse called me over to sit with her while she took her husband aside, who was becoming very distressed. And I remember I just leant over and I said, "Oh, hello, my name's Rachel." And she said, she opened her eyes very briefly and she said, "My name's Isabel." And and then she closed her eyes, and it was very soon after that she died. And you know, that was my first encounter with death, and I was so struck by how much she was herself in death. You know, like she was still Isabel. She was still the same person she had been when she was, you know, in the midst of her life. And and then there were two other women. One called Joyce, who was absolutely terrified of dying, and she wanted me to put her makeup on and always doing her hair, lots of joking. It was quite raucous, and she looked more and more gaudy as she approached death. You know, the makeup look made her look more clown like, you know, and her fear was palpable, and she couldn't say the word death. Her whole family, they would say, "Oh, when Joyce pops off," and they would all laugh, and it was so uncomfortable. um and then there was another woman whose name was Hope, which really suited where she was in her life. She was very at peace. She felt that she'd lived a meaningful life. She took up painting in the hospice, and she painted these beautiful postcards. um and she died lightly, and I just really knew from that early time, like, who I wanted to be like. I understood that you were yourself in death, and that you could choose how you approached it. So that's my beginnings with this work, and then I've just touched on it sort of at different points, working as a children's nurse, working with children with cancer and then HIV. And then I went into academia to look at other cultural ways of viewing health and death. And I spent a long time in Ethiopia studying the healing traditions in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, um, before coming back here and starting my own family, which was a whole different journey. And then more recently, training as a funeral celebrant and a grief recovery method specialist and end of life planning facilitator with Jane, who founded this course. Uh, so that's my kind of my inspiration and my path here. So, Cora, I wonder if you want to say something about yourself and your history and what's brought you here, what's inspired you.
My history. Well, I'm going to start when I was 6. I drowned.
Mm.
And um, I wasn't aware of being afraid. And it was really bizarre because it was a rectangular swimming pool. And at the shallow end, I could swim back and forth without putting my feet down. So I got brave and went to the deep end, but somehow that changed. I don't remember being pulled out. I don't remember anything after that. I remember being on the cement and them working on me and then making me go back into the swimming pool. So, and I became a great swimmer. I love swimming still today. So that was part of it, but something changed even at 6. And I've always been a step at a time with people. I'm also a high introvert person. So and I'm also a Gemini, which means I have a twin. So I really like myself and I like my twin, and I'm never alone. So over the years, I've been called bossy, snobby, you name it, I've been called it because for that reason. And I lived in the bush, which means I lived away from people. So the bush was my companionship, the trees, everything that's involved in the bush, and even still today. And I left school when I was 17. I left home when I was 17 and kind of eventually got to becoming a nursing assistant. And I did that for a couple of years and eventually went to the lab where I did blood and cardiograms. One of the things I found interesting in becoming a nursing assistant, one of the first classes we had, the teacher gave us a full scrap paper. It's one of those long ones. And she said, I'd like you to write down all your things that are wrong with you and sign your name on it and hand it in. So I signed my name and I handed it in and it was blank. And she said to me, why is this blank? And I said, I know what's wrong with me. And what I know and what you know are two different things. So I'm not going to tell you. You're going to have to figure that out yourself. So, of course, I didn't get off to a great start there either. But so moving along, I did that for quite a few years, had kids, divorced, became a psychotherapist in my 40s, but it was an experiential. I'm not very good with a lot of reading, like words. I can do it, but I need time. And so this was experiential with two psychologists and practiced. Had to practice for 35 years. So what's drawn me to this is I think some of the experiences I had in the hospital. One experience, excuse me, that I remember was a man had a gallbladder operation, simple gallbladder operation. He was 65, and but he was really restless, and the nurse asked me to. It was over. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, which is an interesting time, and so she asked me to sit with him. So I sat with him, and then all of a sudden he became really quiet, and all I could see was this white going out of the top of his head. Away he went, and he died, which didn't bother me a lot. I'm not sure why, even to this day, but it just seemed like a natural thing to do. Just before I started my nurse's training, I was to my first funeral. I was 21. I was to my first funeral, and it was a friend. It was a a woman that I knew that was in her late 60s, and she died suddenly. Her husband came home and found her dead. She just passed away to sleep. And so I went to the funeral, but I got stuck in the door. For 10 minutes, I couldn't move, and nobody could get me out of the door. I got stuck right in that door. So that was kind of my first funeral that I had ever been to. So that was, to me, was interesting. And then they asked me to go over and say goodbye to her, which I even think today is weird. I won't go to a coffin if it's open. I have a memory of that person, and that's what I want to keep in my head, not what I see. I recently had this August a friend of mine die, and the daughter wanted, I said, no, not doing that. So type things. So why am I here? I just think it fits with what I believe. I belong to the Baha'i faith, so we have a very clear idea of what happens next or what is supposed to happen next. There's no such thing as hell or the devil or things like that. So if there's a hell, we're in it right now. I mean, I tell people that all the time and they go, yeah, okay. But we are. I mean, if you really look around and look at your life, if you're supposed to be going to a better place, then what is this? Anyway, that's my thought. So, and I've never been afraid of death. And I don't know what, and I've also experienced uh, people I also have experienced out of body experiences. I've had several of those over my life and have talked to people who have had, during cardiac arrest, have had out of experience bodies and they've come back. And of course, they don't tell a lot of people, but I'm aware of what they've experienced based on what I saw prior to the heart attack and what I saw afterwards. I'm a highly visual person, so I can see changes and then I kind of have to think about them. So I just think this is probably the last business I'll have at 77. I don't make 5-year plans and I don't buy green bananas. So I just figured this is something to do. I'm working with Julie, going through this myself. And the reason I wanted to stay with her is because I want to experience what it's like as a client
Mm.
from different than this format. So, and I enjoy her. We've had a lot of fun doing this, and it's just kind of expanded. I've had more friends since I retired 7 years ago than I had during my working time. Really good friends, and Julie and I are on the way to becoming that too. So I don't know if I've answered all your questions.
That's lovely. Thank you for sharing that.
You're quite
Thank
welcome.
you. Yeah, I look forward to our conversation.
Okay, can you wait 1 minute? I have to go to the washroom. I'll
Yeah.
be right back. Thank
Mhm.
you.
We'll wait for Cora to come back.
Yeah, I will just pause the recording.
I asked my Oh, sorry. I asked my mother for forgiveness
Mm.
and she arrived and said, yes, I forgive you. So those are a lot of my belief systems and experiences that I've had to know not to be afraid of death.
Mm, mm.
That was all I wanted to say. Thanks
Yeah,
for listening.
thank you.
Thanks, Cora.
Persis.
Okay, so for me, I mean, I guess like you, I had kind of formative experiences when I was young. There was somebody at my school the same age as me when I was probably about 9 or 10 who had asthma and she died and just never came back to school. It was kind of, she wasn't a close friend, but I really remember that kind of absence.
Mm.
That was my first experience of death of a person that I knew and kind of cared about, you know. And then I guess, my mum had ovarian cancer. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer when I was 20, and she survived for another 11 years. So right through my 20s, my mum was illa, wella, having surgery, having treatment, illa, wella, until kind of probably there was a point where they just said there's actually no more further treatment and she's likely to die within weeks rather than months. And I just remember how shocked we all were, like really, like how shocked we all were and how unprepared we were up to that point. And then we got prepared. So, you know, we made a funeral, we had a DIY funeral. We didn't have a celebrant or a funeral director. We had a cardboard coffin, and she was one of the first burials in the Woodland Burial Site in Brighton. That was in 1995. And we definitely could have done with more knowledge and more support, you know, more knowledgeable support than we had. So we did the best job that we could. But we didn't, you know, I mean, we hadn't, the other aspects of end of life planning, we hadn't really thought about. So kind of, you know, all her belongings that we had grown up with were in the house that she shared with her second husband for 20 years. So they were things that he had lived with for 20 years. And there hadn't been any discussion about whose was, you know, like who was going to have what. And so there were things he was really willing to let go of. And then there were things that were really precious to us that he wasn't willing to let go of at that point. And then eventually he married again. And a lot of those things just kind of fell by the wayside and they never came to us at all. And that was really sad. And there's still tension in our family because of that. My one sister doesn't speak to our stepdad at all since then, kind of quite estranged. So all of those things about having those conversations as well as the caring feel to me really important. And then since then, really, I've kind of been, I have a Buddhist practice. And when I was living in the Buddhist center in London, I was part of the Bardo group, which basically was set up to support people, Buddhists who were dying and attending funerals. We met once a month and did medicine Buddha practice, and we ran a day kind of information weekend, kind of death and dying. All sorts of people came in, and I really got a lot of information then. So you know, a couple of different funeral directors would come, and all sorts of people who were in that field, palliative care, and I've done a lot of care work. It just kind of been rolling along in that way. And then the course kind of just popped up in social media. And I was thinking, I wonder if that's something that I could do. It's that thing about that offering of practical skills that kind of holds everything else that's going on for a family or a person who's starting to think about what would happen if, you know, so not even someone who's ill, but like just turning towards that. And I find it so interesting. I was talking to someone the other day and she was saying, she's in her 80s. She was saying when her aunts died, one of her aunts, everything was organized. She knew what she wanted. She'd made a will. She'd sorted lots of things out. She talked about stuff before she died. And her other aunt, well, there was like nothing, no organization at all, like complete chaos, papers in a complete mess. That's kind of, a lot of it is about how we are living, you know, like the kind of people that we are. Yeah, that kind of the psychology of it. But I mean, I guess as somebody kind of untrained, I feel that those kind of practical skills about just encouraging people to think for themselves about what they might want without making a massive big deal about it. I think that's, yeah, that's my role. I think that's the way I'm going.
Thank you. I really like your phrase, turning towards, just encourage people to turn towards death. Yeah, yeah. And I think, just what we've shared, even between the three of us, just reveals how individual our experiences of death have been, but how motivating they are for us to support others to find their place within it. Let's move on to a meditation if you're comfortable with that. And it's just a guided meditation. And I thought I would make a recording of this. I mean, you both have your own spiritual practices, but I have found it helpful to have like a small practice that I do when I sit down to do any of this kind of work. It just helps me to focus. And you could use this recording if you wanted, or something else, or we each have our own way. But this is one possibility, and it's just a very simple breathing meditation. So feel free to put your cameras off if you'd like. Or just sit comfortably and close your eyes and sit up tall with a neutral spine, just slowly shifting front to back and side to side till you feel that the crown of your head sits directly over your tailbone. And then you'll let your chin drop towards neutral. Release your shoulders by resting your arms in your lap with your palms facing up or down. Breathing quietly, slowly, in and out through the nose. Take a moment to settle your attention on the breath. Notice the movement of the breath through your nostrils. Follow that movement into the body. Feel the rise and fall of your chest, the expansion and softening of the belly. Perhaps feeling the breath in the back of your body, the sides of your ribs, or anywhere else. Notice where it is that you feel the breath the most clearly, and then anchor the mind in that spot. All this deep curiosity on the breath as we breathe for 10. Breathing in through the nostrils 1, and out 1. In 2, and out 2. In 3, and In 4 and out 4. In 5 and out 5. In 6 and out 6. In 7 and out 7. In 8 out 8. 9 out 9. 10 and out 10. And just returning to normal breathing, gently letting the awareness come back into our space. Up and back. Welcome. We'll go back to our share and just think about taking action. And I've got two different drivers for taking action. Motivated action, which is driven by an external factor, or inspired action, which comes from knowing that what we're doing is meaningful, no matter the outcome. And I felt really encouraged by this idea that what we're doing is important, no matter the outcome. Because on the one hand, we do know that the outcome of our life is death, but there's something about doing this work that has meaning in and of itself, or at least that's how I've experienced it. But the idea of the external drivers, like maybe the external might be that we want to leave things nice and organized for our family, and an internal one might be more to do with how we feel about preparing inwardly for our own death. But it seems to me that these two go hand in hand, and we can lean into one more when we're needing a bit of a push from the outside, and then we can reach inward when we need to find that creative source. So as we're thinking about taking action, and of course, one of the most significant things about having an end of life plan is that we take action so that it's done. And as you were saying, Persis, there's so much in our personalities that shape how we do that. So whether there's a certain amount of chaos or whether it's very organized. And I was really aware of that recently, just reflecting on Jane, who founded this company and began this work, and then James, who took it on, and then the work that I'm doing, taking it forward. When I met Jane, I met her in Findhorn, which is a long established spiritual community in the north of Scotland. And I met James in the city of London. He was on his lunch break as a lawyer. And it was just these two different kind of places. And of course, both places are full of people, but they're all people with very different drivers. Some very organized, very externally motivated to succeed in certain ways, and others really leaning into what's inside. And so for ourselves, as we do our own work and prepare our own end of life plan, we've got these two pieces. Uh, but I think as I was reflecting on this, it can be really helpful when we're thinking about how to speak to others about this, which of course is what we want to ultimately do, is thinking about what it is that motivates their action. Are they inspired by but from this inner well, or are they much more driven by something exterior? And that just changes a little bit how we talk about what we're doing and what we're offering. Um, so 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 this sort of really is why we make an end of life plan, that we each have our own personal motivation. Um, and I thought we could just chat about that a little bit. Uh, I have got a few notes um, that I can draw on, but I think it's much more interesting if we talk about it. Uh, I read a while ago um, a story that Osho told, and it's one that's really guided me recently. It's a very simple story. He talks about well, the story goes that there were two men, and I've forgotten what they've done, but anyway, they've done something to break the law, and they've been thrown into prison and they're going to be executed. But for whatever reason, the king feels that the punishment is too draconian and he wants to free them. But his advisors say, no, you can't do that. It would set a really bad precedent, and it just won't look good. So so he comes up with this idea that they must walk across a tightrope, and if they get across the tightrope, then they can be free. And then he feels that he's offered them this opportunity, but the people see that they've had to undergo this trial. Uh, so the first one walks across, and he gets across the chasm very successfully. And the other one says, "How did you do that?" And he said, "Well, I just noticed that when I leant a bit too much this way, I leant a bit that way. And then when I lent a bit too much this way, I leant back a bit." And I've just found this guidance. When we lean a bit too much this way, just gently lean back this way. And then when we lean too much this way, we can just gently lean back that way. Uh, and as I was thinking about the kind of external and internal motivation, I found that the idea that we can lean into this, like we need to get a will done, we need to have a plan in place, those kind of that very organized having our affairs in order kind of mentality. We can lean towards that, but maybe you can go a bit too far, having to have everything perfect, and that can be a trigger to stopping you getting further on, and you just lean back a little bit and just go inward. And then just like finding out like what's stopping me, or where's the fear, or what's coming up. Lean a bit too far this way and you tip into inaction maybe, or and just leaning back again. So that's a metaphor that I've found really, really helpful in lots of things, but in this work in particular. So that's one of them. There any thoughts on that? Why do we make plans?
I can say something. I think, well, for me, a lot of it is certainly I live on my own. I don't have a partner, and I don't have children. So like who would be sorting it out if it's not sorted? It's kind of, so it's that was a big motivator for me to be like, yeah, I just need to get more organized so that if I did, if I was, if something happened to me suddenly, my sisters wouldn't have to deal with everything, that they would know, they'd have some guidance. And actually when I broke my wrist, that was I was like, oh yeah, it's like suddenly like things happen and then suddenly you actually can't do very much. It's like, yeah, kind of. So yeah. And for me it's interesting as well because obviously I I went through this process last year, but actually a lot of it is it was kind of good enough for then to make me feel like I had completed it enough, engaged with it enough to graduate. But actually, I haven't engaged with it enough that if I died tomorrow, I wouldn't be leaving quite a mess for my sisters to sort out. So my decluttering, for example, is in progress, shall we say.
I think you're touching on a really important point there, Persis, that we have to start somewhere. And we can sometimes be stopped by perfectionism. So if we think that the house has to be perfectly organized, or the will has to be written with everything outlined, I mean, for me, it was the will that I found really difficult. It was this idea that I had to make decisions that I couldn't. It was complicated, because there's the blended family involved and stepchildren and divorces and and I was so tormented by the idea that I might get it wrong and that it would be complicated. But actually, when I took the first step and went to the solicitor, he just said, it's just one line. Everything I own is divided between my 4 daughters. I was like, oh, really? Is it that easy? He was like, well, you begin there. And so at the moment, that's what mine says. And there's time to elaborate on that. And, but it was such a relief to know that I could start somewhere simple. And I think that's a really important point that, you've already gone through this process once and there's still more to do. Of course, our lives continue. We're doing this in the context of our lives. And on decluttering, I did work with someone who supported me to sort some things out. And she resisted the word declutter because her reflection was that many of the things we've gathered around us have meaning or are difficult to let go of for certain emotional reasons. And if we start to think of our things as clutter, it can be quite shaming, perhaps. So she helped me to think of the things around me, because I've had times when things around me have been very chaotic, and that's reflected like difficult relationships or, and she was able to say, she just helped me to be very kind to myself about my things, and to look kindly at how I might like unpick what felt like chaos at the time. So I think being kind to yourself and not needing to have it all done, but to be just gently tending this work.
Yeah, that's a very good word, kind of like tending.
Yeah, it's a word actually I've been using it a lot. Tending our grief has been because I'm also a grief recovery method specialist. I'm working with people who are really wanting to meet their grief, and the grief recovery program has got the word recovery, and I've just been really holding that, because it's not a word I might have chosen myself. I think tending is the word I would choose. Cora, have you got any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm a fairly organized person. I've had to be being a single parent for a lot of years. But one of the main reasons is I think this needs to be done, period. But myself and my estranged children have very different ideas. I'm not sure who brought them up. I often wonder, I would love to ask them, but I don't think they get the message. So it's important to have things done proper the way I want them, because I don't want a casket, which I know would be against what everything they believe in. belonging to the faith that I belong to, they're okay with that, but they don't understand it. They wouldn't understand it. So a lot of these things, and the big thing is, and I'm still mulling this over, is when I die, I want my computer destroyed. I don't want anyone looking through my stuff. I want it destroyed. I don't want anyone to know where my life has been. If they want to know where my life has been, they need to ask me personally.
Mm-mm.
And because I will not have celebration of life. To me, that's an oxymoron that is really bizarre. And I have several different quotes that I would like it to be. So my life is in a computer, like all of us today. And I'm struggling with that because I think, well, they should know. But then when I think about my parents' death, so my mother was a war bride who came over. She traveled through Europe. I have a picture that she took in 1937 of Hitler and his two sidekicks. It's an actual picture. Nuremberg, 1937. So she came from Hungary, walked through to Canada, to England because she wanted to learn English. Well, she already spoke four languages. So English was just another one she wanted to speak. Married my father, came to Canada. Mother has a grade 12 education. So in 1937, that's huge for a woman. My father has a grade 4 education. So that can kind of give you an idea of what it was like in our house. And I knew nothing about anytime I asked my mother about her past, she cried. So I stopped asking her.
Mm-mm.
No one really knows, although I understand my daughter, it was her birthday, so she was talking to me for a little bit, did some investigating, but she hasn't told me what it's about. And it's the same with my father. He didn't tell us anything about his past. He was a hard worker. He took care of the family really well, and that's it. So I just feel if my children want to know, then they have to know it now.
Mm-mm. Mm.
That's that's it. The other stuff will be organized, the funeral, the will, and all that, so they can go through that. In fact, I will, send it to my daughter because she's the more not capable one. She's the one who likes organization and she likes everything down. So that's basically it. And if you want to get, because I don't know their lives and they don't know mine, and that's fine. I've come to a place where I'm okay with that. I like the story you told. It's about balance. You go
Mm-mm.
this way and you go that. And it's just making me think maybe I've lost my balance right today in my life right now. I
Mm-mm.
have no idea why. Well, I do because I was accosted by one of the men here. So it's kind of left me unbalanced. And I seem to have a hard time getting back to balance. But it was only been a couple of days. So I just figure I'll just work with it and see where it goes. I mean, I'm pretty adept at getting myself back on track.
Mm-mm.
And so I think that's pretty well it. Um, I like the idea of tending our grief. I don't believe that grief can be overcome or recovered. I believe that you can learn to live with it. I had a client who was married for 42 years and she came to me wanting to recover it. And I said to her, this gentleman who's been in your life for 42 years has penetrated you, not only physically, but spiritually and emotionally. How do you recover from that? How do you, to me, recovery means it doesn't happen anymore or you're over it. To me, you'll never get over grief. I
Mm-mm.
have a friend a girlfriend of 35 years who died from ALS. And it was 16 years ago. And I still have a problem. I saw a young friend of mine. He was 13, and there's a whole history behind it, killed by a train. And that was 30 years ago. And I still have trouble with it. So I don't know that I don't understand the word recovery of grief.
Mm.
So that's kind of my take on this one.
Yeah, So I'll respond briefly to that, but I'll refer you to the book, and I will send out a reading list. It's this one, the Grief Recovery Handbook. And it's not talking about forgetting or getting over the relationship. It's talking about recovering from the pain. And in doing so, it can allow the memories of the relationship to arise in a way that you can cherish them. But I agree with you. I would perhaps hesitate to have chosen the word recovery, but the actual program that it describes is a very beautiful program,
Okay.
and I can really recommend that. And I think one aspect of doing our end of life plans, it does evoke our experiences of grief because, you know, we recall those who have died or we contemplate our own death, and there's grief in this. And I think it can be right to take care of ourselves. When you're describing yourself as a bit off balance at the moment, Cora, because you've had an experience recently, you know, and you have to tend to yourself uh, in order to be open to this deep work. Um, and the other thing that you were referring to that we will look at legacy. You know, what's the legacy that you want to leave behind? And and as you're reflecting on it, it's not a legacy you want your children to find in your computer. You know, so
Right.
that's the other aspect of our end of life plan, our digital legacy. You know,
Footprint. Right.
how do we, yeah, our digital footprint, exactly. Like, how do we take care of that? And it's quite a big job. You know, as you say, we do pretty well everything online. Um, and you know, there's all sorts of double authentication, and there's passwords here, and there's banking there, and you know, like, so there's how do those who come after us access everything they need to, and how do we keep private those things that we don't want them to access? So these are really valid questions, and how we want those, what we want to offer of ourselves to those we leave behind, you know, because of course how they think of us is entirely their business, um, and we can influence that up to a point. But I think, you know, I like to think of legacy as really what it is that I want to offer my daughters or my friends who I leave behind. Um, and we will think about that as we go on. I came across the idea of writing legacy love letters recently, which I thought was quite a special idea, and I'm going to explore that a little bit more. Um, you know, I think it would be quite a treasured thing for someone to come across a letter that was written to them. Um, and you know, maybe that would be something that you would consider for your own children, or you know, you're describing that you're largely estranged from them. You don't want them to have full access to everything that's in your computer. You want them to ask you now. But there might be something that you want to say to them about your experience, or even your knowledge of your mother and your father's experiences. Um, so so we
It's
can,
it's it's
yeah.
interesting you say that because I had a client who was dying of cancer. She was a young woman of 25, she's 30, I guess, and had two young girls. And this is going back years. And she did, between us, we wrote letters to the kids.
Mm.
So it's obviously I had that knowledge already and I didn't know it. Yeah. She did a beautiful job of it. So that when they were older, that they could read it and see. Her spooky thing was at her funeral, she sang her own funeral song. And that was spooky, spooky to see her in the coffin and hear her singing at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, it's we all have our own very personal take on these things.
Yeah.
You know, I agree with you that it's a little bit strange to hear the voice of the person you're commemorating, but a lot of people don't share that view. They want
Yeah.
something different. So it's really intensely personal. Let me go back to my share and see what my next point was. Right. Thank you. Sorry. Sometimes somehow it's freaking music. Can you still hear me if I speak now? Oh, I can't hear you. I don't know how to
I was
stop the music.
muted.
I don't know where it's coming from. Uh, okay, right, right. Can you say something for me, Persis? And I'll see if I can hear you.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. And the music has stopped. So I've got absolutely no idea where that came from.
Mm.
Um,
The wonders of technology.
isn't that weird? I wasn't listening to anything like it. I don't think it's on my Canva. Right. Now I'm not sure if the screen's sharing still. Let's try again. I do have a little video that I do want to share with you from Catherine Mannix. Uh and I think I might do that now. Oh no, it's actually, hold on. Right. I don't know why it's why there's music attached to it. Um okay, yes, I did have a little thing about procrastination that I was going to mention, but in a way we've talked about these things. Uh we often think of procrastination as something negative, and it can be if it's something that's stopping us completing an end of life plan. Uh then it is negative, but just in terms of our our balance, um we can look at why we're not getting on with something, and in terms of doing our end of life plan, I think this is a really important piece. If we're struggling with our mood, and that could be related to grief. That's one thing that we've already mentioned. If we're over planning and we're wanting it to be perfect, that could be another one. Fear of making the wrong choice, or just being immersed in the day-to-day activity of life. And the other reason that procrastination often happens is that we thrive on deadline pressure, which, of course, when we're looking at end of life planning, um, it doesn't work, because the deadline is truly the deadline, and then we're not around to resolve it. Uh, so that's procrastination, and we can find that middle place where we allow ourselves to notice what's holding us back, and then gently tend those needs so that we can step forward. But that noticing, um, it has a kind of, like the procrastination is like an incubation phase in a way of this work. Um, Talking about death, we can go back to that after we've watched this. Now, I hope this will actually play. You might be familiar with Catherine Mannix. She's a palliative care doctor, and she's lovely, and she's got some lovely things to say. So I'll play this now.
My name's Catherine Mannix, and in my humble opinion, dying's probably not as bad as you're expecting. We've stopped talking about dying. We've stopped mentioning the D words. Instead of saying dead, we say passed or passed away. Instead of saying dying, we might say seriously ill. And families don't understand that death is approaching when those words are used. And that is in fact a bit of a problem for us. And so now a family will sit around the bed of somebody so sick that they will be dying and not know what to say, not know what to say to each other, not know what to say to the dying person. And the dying person doesn't know what to say either and doesn't know what to expect, wondering whether each breath might be their last breath, a scene of sadness and anxiety and despair. And in my humble opinion, it doesn't need to be like that at all. We've lost the rich wisdom of normal human dying, and it's time for us to talk about dying and reclaim the wisdom. What does normal dying look like? Well, dying like giving birth really is just a process. Gradually, people become more tired, more weary. As time goes by, people sleep more and they're awake less. Families can learn when to give medicines and when to introduce visitors. But sometimes a visitor might happen or a medicine might be due during that sleep. And that's when we can discover that a change has taken place. It's tiny, but it's really significant. And it's that instead of just being asleep, this person has temporarily become unconscious. We can't wake them up. We can't give them that medicine. We can't tell them that that visitor is here. And yet when they waken later on, they tell us they've had a good sleep. So we know that this coma doesn't feel frightening, that lapsing into unconsciousness just isn't noticed by us when it happens. So as time goes by, people are awake less and asleep more until eventually they're just unconscious all the time. We'll be so relaxed that we won't bother to clear our throats. So maybe we'll be breathing in and out through little bits of mucus or saliva at the back of our throat. It can make a rattly, funny noise. People talk about the death rattle as though it's something terrible. But actually, it tells me that my patient is so deeply relaxed, so deeply unconscious, that they're not even feeling that tickle of saliva as their air bubbles in and out through it from their lungs. So at the very end of somebody's life, there will be a period of shallow breathing and then one out breath that just isn't followed by another in breath. Sometimes it's so gentle that families don't even notice that it's happened. So normal human dying, just a really gentle process, something we can recognize, something we can prepare for, something we can manage. And this should be something we can celebrate. This is something we should be able to console each other with. But because it's become impolite to talk about dying, it's the really best kept secret in medicine. So, in my humble opinion, dying is something we should be reclaiming, we should be talking about, we should be consoling each other about. Please pass that on.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to receive notifications for new videos.
Yeah, so I thought she had a lovely message for us. Have you come across Catherine Mannix? Yeah, versus you have Cora, you might
What?
not.
I don't know her, but one of the things I'd like to add to that is that often before a person dies, they call for someone that has already passed. So when my mother was unwell, my brother-in-law would take care of her. And one day she asked for Ava. So the brother-in-law phones me and he says, "Who's Ava?" And I said, "Oh, she's my mother's cousin or aunt that they brought over from Hungary after the war. But don't worry, mom's dying." Well, that was the wrong thing to say. He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, when people start the dying process, they often call for help." Well, he just lost it. He just lost it. And I don't think he's talked to me from that day since. He has, but not in a nice way. And 6 weeks later, she had died. So I was well prepared, and I couldn't get my sister to get prepared for that. But I had seen that often in the hospital. Even in another language, it's really clear what the person is asking for through the body, what the body's talking about. So I really liked the video, and that's a caveat I just want to add to it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, I interviewed someone for my podcast a while ago, and their son had died um, in a car accident. And then the following year, they were visiting someone, an old family friend who hadn't had children and had sort of they'd not stayed in touch so much while their children had grown up. So they hadn't seen much of each other over the 20 years that their children were growing up. And so this friend hadn't ever really known their son Jack. But anyway, they were visiting, and she was very poorly. Um, and she said, "You know, it's very strange because your son came to me in a dream." And they had some kind of conversation. And as they left, Jack's father said he was certain that that was the last time they would see her. He really felt that Jack was coming to greet her, and that that was an end of life message.
Yeah.
Um, and what was striking about that was that this wasn't someone that was known strongly by the woman who was dying, but there are these connections between people that we don't understand and we don't necessarily know about. That there can be that opening up to something as we die. But I think what you're describing, Cora, as you try to talk to your family about this, they were closed to it. And I think that's what Catherine is describing, that we're close to this because we don't know, and those who have sat with the dying over and over again do know something about this, and they do know that there's peace and that there's grace, and that it doesn't have to be a scary thing. It can be sad, and it can be lots of things, but it doesn't have to be the frightening thing that our culture has.
It's just learning to say it differently. It didn't occur to me. I mean, I was processing in my own head, and the words just came out. If I had thought about it, I would have probably said it differently. The reaction would have been the same, but I wouldn't have just said, "Oh, she's dying," just like that.
Yeah. And I think,
Yeah.
this is where, as we're thinking about working with people around this subject, where we can be mindful of that
Mhm.
sometimes being very blunt with our language is very, very uncomfortable for people.
Mm.
We do use all these euphemisms, and we'll find, as we find our own voice in this work, we'll find out whether it feels okay for us to, at one point I was like so against euphemisms. I just thought it just like muddied the water. It didn't help. Much better to be direct. And I think I've softened a little bit. I just recognize that sometimes we need to meet people where they are.
Mm.
And if they're not comfortable with very direct language, then to use these words, someone's past, or and then we can just gently hold them in that space, because when there's space within us that we don't wobble, we can offer that stability to them, and maybe there's time when they can speak more directly. Uh, but this is, we find our path here, but it's really good for us to really reflect on the kinds of euphemisms that we use within our families, within our group of friends, what we feel about them. Uh, Another thing that I think can be really helpful when we're thinking about having a conversation with someone else about death, and whether that's about our own death because we're making our own end of life plan and we're wanting our children or our siblings or our parents even to know what we want, um, or whether we're talking with someone else. Sometimes direct eye contact can feel too much.
Mm.
So maybe going for a walk with someone. As you walk along, you're both looking forward. You're not necessarily looking at each other. It's not quite so confronting. You could say, as you walk along, I wonder if we could talk about um, my thoughts on my funeral, or whatever it is you want to discuss, or maybe over a meal. Uh, where you're eating and sharing food, so it's a little bit less intense perhaps.
It's interesting about euphemisms as well. That really resonated with me, because it's that thing about not being confrontational or too blunt. It's also, if you use the words that it's like reflective listening, isn't it? It's like,
Yeah.
that's the word that they use to mean what you mean. So so you can kind of do that, and then you can also introduce the words that you would use, but not in that blunt way, but just in a normal way that I would use that word, but that I've come to use words. Yeah, more. That's just I'm relaxed with those words, so I'm not so it can be easier for the other person to hear it.
Yes.
I think that's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, thinking of it in terms of reflective listening, I think that's very helpful, because then you really are reflecting what the others say, and you can add clarity, to that. Like you say, you can begin to introduce words that are a bit clearer. Um, it's yeah, we're just really wanting to meet those we're engaging with where they are, but also to develop understanding. So that, if we were thinking of our own end of life plan, I imagine that you're having some conversations with your sisters, Persis, about what you might want. Um, and how have you found that? Have they been responsive to that?
Yes, very. They're kind of yeah, they're on board with it. They're on board with it.
Yeah, that's encouraging.
Yeah. But it's interesting over this period. I'm not sure how much thought or work they've put into their own plans. Like, we haven't talked about that, about them kind of making a plan.
Mm-mm.
I mean, my one sister, she's married with children, adult children, so she's got some things in place because of that. But,
Yeah.
we've had a lot of conversations about their kind of lasting power of attorney and all of that. I don't know what that's called in Canada, but yeah, there's kind of like those decisions, like how yeah, which has been very interesting.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe we'll just start to reflect on what our takeaways from this session are. Um, I hope that next week Wathira will be able to join us. Um, but in the meantime, we can just think about, what's motivating us. Uh, and obviously, Persis, because you've already gone through the program, maybe just using this week to really reflect on where you feel drawn. What are you leaning into with this? Uh, which part of it are you wanting to encourage people to turn towards? I really like that. Turn towards. Gentle.
Yeah, and certainly one of my takeaways is that one of the things you were saying right in the beginning about internal and external motivations, that really resonated with me. It's like, it's in so many ways, not just about end of life planning, but so many kind of activities kind of so used to being results driven. And so much more. One of the things I was thinking is, like, when I was engaging with my end of life plan last year, I was like, it's so great. It's like I have to do it because I'm doing this course. It's like, otherwise I'd probably never get around to it. But it's like, I'm turning that. I'm giving myself external motivation for something that's actually internally motivated. It's kind of like, it's the kind of, yeah, it's that kind of, it's a balancing act, isn't it? So
It is. And I think that's where balance is important, because we can support each other with that external motivation. We can be here to hold each other accountable, to encourage each other. But also, it's really important for us to find that inner place, and look at why might there be resistance to this piece of it. Um, and then we can bring that to the group as well. This is a space where we can really support each other to do this work and find our own place within it.
yeah.
Cora, what are your takeaways?
I have several, but first, I'd like to thank you for letting me tell you about being accosted, because suddenly everything has changed. I didn't realize until that moment I wrote it down because I've been in a housing situation. I had to send it to housing, but I didn't use the word. And it just kind of floated around until I spoke it. And I suddenly went, oh, yeah, okay. So thank you for that. So my takeaways are balance between the external and the internal. The external can be a trigger point. So the internal gets crazy and it goes back and forth. Secondly, that recovering from grief is about pain. It's not about recovery and forgetting or arriving at a conclusion. And thirdly, legacy. What would you like to leave behind? So it gives me thought for the computer. I'm pretty sure I'm not going to change that because they have stopped developing a legacy with me, their choice. And so my philosophy is a mother never lives long enough to be appreciated. And so they'll have to live with that. That's not my responsibility to, kowtow or to encourage or that. To them, I'm still mummy. They haven't recognized that I'm a mother who now has a life. So, I mean, that's part of some of the BS that I got back. I was hospitalized 2 years ago, and when they came to talk to me, they just kind of dumped all this shit on me. So I got kind of it. So those are the three things for my takeaway.
Thank you for sharing that. I think for me, I'm taking away the excitement of beginning this program again. I've done it many times, and I'm always so curious about the dynamics within the group. And we all bring stories of life and death to these sessions. So I'm really grateful to you for sharing so openly. And my takeaway is my excitement, actually, for what's unfolding. Yay! So the plan is I will send out some materials to you during the week. I'm sort of busy working on it. My tech skills are a little limited, as you saw with the the untoward sound. But I'm putting materials together and I will send them to you. So I'll send you the recording. I'll send you a reading list, and I'll give you a much more detailed overview of the program so that you've got a sense of where we're going. Next week, we're going to be looking at household issues, and you touched on that, Persis, just how important that is. And in so many end of life planning, or sort of what people think of as end of life planning, they think of the will and the power of attorney, but rarely the details of the household. So we'll start there, and yeah, we'll begin to look at household. And it'll give you another chance to look at your things. And I'm in the same boat. I need to look at my things. I'm a natural hoarder. So I will send a reading list. I'll send some materials for you to look at, to reflect on some of the things that we've covered today and to prepare you for next week. Your book, this one, Cora, will arrive at some point. As it said, in November. I mean, I hope it arrives sooner, but it is on its way. And the I will at some point. I'll invite you into the community platform that I'm setting up. It's taken me a little bit longer to get it sorted, but once it's up and running, I will be running a grief recovery group within there. And if you want to know more about the grief recovery program, that might be something. And I just want to say a big thank you.
Mm.
And
The other takeaway, I have one more takeaway.
yeah.
Developing talks. It's kind of a passion of mine. So as we go along, the information is really helpful. So that would be another takeaway. And each week I'm going to put that as a takeaway.
Yeah.
So hopefully by the time I'm finished, at least these 4 months or 3 months, however many it is, I can start to do the talks.
Yeah.
So,
So you're thinking about going out into your community to
Yeah.
do a talk.
yeah.
Yeah.
So senior citizens, recreation areas, some of the condos are just for seniors.
Mm.
So I just starting, a couple of years ago, I was on, one of the forums for dating for seniors online. So I kind of have a roster of places I went for aging people, for anyone over 60, but it
Mm.
wasn't very successful simply because I didn't realize this. A lot of Christian faiths don't believe in remarriage.
Right.
I didn't know that. So, and then a lot of them thought it was horrible, but they're secretly doing it. Anyway, I just stopped, but I have a roster of people for seniors already that I can talk to. So,
Great.
yeah,
Well, as we go through any of the materials I send out, feel free to use them,
thank you.
modify them. Yeah. All right. I look forward to next week. Have a lovely week.
Thank you, Rachel.
Bye. So nice to see you.
Cheers, Cora. See you next
You
week.
too.
See you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.